literally 1 year of experience 10 times over. And then it's like, then I combine that with like Charlie Munger's advice is always like invert, like always invert, like take things and change them, look at them the opposite way. And to me, it was like listening to founders, I was like, wow, that one, a lot of those people work hard, which I think is admirable. But then two, it's like that we don't need to use like linear time for experience. Like there's other ways to think about what you're doing. I think challenging yourself is one of those. So that's like my background, why I think I don't know, like that massive course load in the front might be worth mentioning, because I'll get into it later. And I think, again, sets me apart in terms of, my guess is, I don't have evidence on this, that actually in the last 10 years, I've taught more than virtually anyone at any major university. The only people who may have taught more would be like the adjuncts who do like multiple schools. But that's like a...
But you do multiple schools too.
Well, yeah, but all in the same... No, that's actually even harder though. The people that like make their living by like teaching like a Spanish intro class at like 4 different colleges.
Oh, wow.
Like that's like that's a tough... That's like where it's really tough.
It's like a travel nurse. Going to multiple...
Yeah, it
different...
is. Yeah, it really is. And then it's like, the difference is like, yeah, I'm in multiple schools, but technically, actually them all being housed in McCombs is still way easier than what the... Like, so that's my only guess is like, I don't want to... You know, there's probably adjuncts who have done something like that. Although I would guess that nobody has done it for that long of a time. Like I'd bet there are people in the U.S. who've actually done more than me in a year, but then that's usually high burnout, or then they transition to something more stable. That'd be my guess.
So I want to jump straight into this, and I just started already recording.
I was guessing.
And the first thing that I realized when we were, you know, talking one of the classes after the lecture was over, the thing is, it doesn't even feel like a lecture every single time. That's the most unique thing I've realized about the way you teach, is like, it doesn't feel like a lecture, it feels like a conversation the whole time. And you know, I asked you, you know, you were just talking about this record that you kind of have, unofficial record of the most amount of classes in a year. And I was like, that's crazy. You're teaching 21 classes in a year. And you just said, not if you love it.
Yeah.
And I just remember this really, I just don't know why that's stuck out to me, because a lot of people would look at that as obsessive. How do you view that?
Yeah, first, I want to appreciate the fact that you mentioned that class feels more like a conversation or discussion. And I really aspire for that. So that I think is really valuable feedback. I think that's the hope. That's one thing. Like, I think one of the things I think we'll get into is like, what do I disagree with in academia? And one of them you actually just nailed right up front, Sarthik, which is that we're too like lecture oriented. You know, all professors are smart people, really well read, everything else. But it's like, I hope that it's not just, hey, I have knowledge and let me tell you it. It's let's work through this together. You mentioned it. I want to just emphasize, like, I think that's so important. Second though, yeah, I don't know. In that conversation, I was kind of, I think I mentioned at the end, like, I don't know, I've not really talked a lot about that with many other people. My colleagues are kind of like, that's insane. Why do you do that with a large teaching load? But, you know, there are moments and days that are really tough, but I look at it, go over across a year, and I feel like it's just doing what I want to do. And the volume is less of an issue. It's almost like just more opportunities to be excited to present material to different audiences and to bring up new ideas and to make an impact. And so I don't know. I feel like it's, as I was saying then, and I'll repeat, it's like, I really enjoy it. I really love it. And as a result, I'm not thinking about it in terms of quantity as in work that must be done, but in terms of quantity, in terms of opportunities that lay in front of me. So I want to embrace that.
One of the things when I was researching a little bit more about you, I came across this 40 under 40 quants, and there was like an interview with you where they asked you, what's something that you wish you had learned earlier as a business professor? And you said, I wish I would have seen how much scope there is, I'm kind of paraphrasing, to like actually be creative in the art of teaching. Can you talk a little bit about like, how were you teaching before, or like when did you realize that you can actually impact so much change through teaching and be like, have your own unique value in the way you go about teaching?
Yeah. So I never, went through undergrad and grad school and all that, and, had a lot of different professors. I think I never thought about that really until it was my first summer where I got to teach the class Financial Statement Analysis, which is where I've spent most of my time. And it's a different class than you took with me, but I like almost can't help it. I bring in little excerpts and commentary from that class because I think it adds so much. And that class is just this deep dive into understanding these companies and performance. I was asked to teach that by my department for the first time in 2011. I took that class in grad school, and I think I was actually a TA, if I believe. So I was in a PhD program for 5 years. So I was a TA, I think, for 4 years for the financial statement analysis class at the Fuqua School of Business at Duke. And I actually was like, I had a course packet and I TA'd it, and I was like, oh, this is gonna be great. It's gonna be like easy to do because I like the class. And I was walking through my course packet and using the textbook and looking for examples. And it was, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks into the summer. And I just kind of was like, this stuff I can't use. I don't feel authentic just teaching this material. It seemed too mechanical, too kind of rote memorization. And I think I had like a very high stress, like, that moment of like, I'm not authentically doing this. Like I shouldn't do this. I can't do this, whatever else. But then I just started realizing like, well, maybe I can try to start writing things. So I think that was the first time. This is the summer after my first year, but the first time teaching financial statement analysis, which truly is the class that I love, where I realized like I have to, as an educator, I'm not just delivering material, I have to create material. My guess is I was putting 8 hours into each 75-minute class that summer. And we were 4 days a week for some reason. But I was just like, I remember like going to bed knowing I had more work to do, or like taking a nap. I take a nap in my office, like, because I was like, I got to keep going. I don't think I ever put that much into something. And I'm certain that initial product was flawed and I made mistakes, and but I feel like it was massively impactful as in like content creation. Like how can I, innovate in terms of what I create, not just, competently deliver something. And so I think what helped is actually sitting back, seeing the material that was out there in a class that I as a student, I guess I didn't realize. It wasn't until I stood in front of I had to stand in front of the room and deliver the material that I was like, oh, this material isn't very, it's not that it's bad. It's like, it doesn't offer enough. It didn't seem like it was impactful enough. And again, as a student and a TA, like I had no idea about that. Like I just never entered my mind until I'm standing in front of the room. I'm like, I got to do a better job here.
Yeah. So, you've heard the phrase like people are praised in public for what they practice in private. I want to dig a little bit more into the private side. You kind of touched on this right now. It's like, what are the things that you had to do privately that have led you to show up the way you do in a public setting like a class? And how have you gone about developing those skills?
Just this is where, and you and I kind of connected initially over the Founders podcast that David Senra does.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I found that podcast so affirming because it's not only what the host David Senra does, but like obviously the people he's covering through the biographies and autobiographies and everything else. But one of the big takeaways is like two things: is that like, hard work is good if it's something you really care about, and you're not just toiling for the sake of someone else, but like you care about it. And then two, the idea of like reading. I mean, there's so many smart people that Founders is covering that basically spent so much time reading. And what is the background work for the class? It's just willingness to look and ask questions, but then to read. I like reading the business news. I like reading, some headline about a company, and then I'm going to spend time. Wait, is that the full story? And then look through their financial filings and figure out, well, there's actually this side or that or whatever else. So it's the aspect of reading, but like sort of, I was never a journalist, but like that idea, or, I did a PhD route, but don't actually do research. But I feel like there's still that takeaway of like research, get to the drivers behind performance. It's a different setting, of course, but I like the idea of like, let me fully try to understand, let me put the time in, let me read, let me consume material, let me look at different perspectives. And that I think is the main, like, I almost want to do that anyway. So it's like, it's like that. That's why I really like the financial statement analysis class, because it can be so much about current events. It can be so much, in our class, the one that you took, we covered a little bit about, budgeting and some classic aspects in accounting. And those are really useful skills. But like, I like the application to a company or situation as opposed to just the traditional material. So you saw probably more traditional material than I'm doing in the class that I teach to my MBA audience.
I see. So when you're researching, you could go into a Whole Foods. Let's just use Whole Foods as an example because I know you like Whole Foods. And so Whole Foods, you're looking into the research behind Whole Foods, and you're diving deep into that. And there's obviously a lot of media that sort of kind of way more skewing more towards Whole Foods and how they might want to be perceived as a brand. So you have to be skeptical in those situations. I remember coming across you were like a faculty speaker, I think, in 2021 for McCombs, and you gave a speech about being a skeptic. And one thing you said here, and you're, I think, paraphrasing Charlie Burns, who was a comedian who gave a commencement speech somewhere else at UW-Madison, where he says, "Be a skeptic, not a cynic. Bubbles are built with lies, but bridges are built with truth, and truth can only be found in healthy skepticism. The cynics rant and rave on Slack or Twitter or wherever, but the skeptics do the work. The skeptic will make the world a better place. The cynic will just try making themselves feel better in a broken world." Can you talk a little bit more about skepticism? How do you deploy that in your life? Why is that important?
Yeah, so and I posted on LinkedIn because it was a ton of fun to do. That's the graduation speech I got to give to the class of 2021, which was just one of the most tumultuous times for students, for educators, everything else, where we spent a lot of that online. It's funny, I specifically remember writing that. I was writing that in my garage. It's kind of funny. Like, when I was doing class in my garage, we had some remodeling work done on our house during the time. So it was like, I couldn't use the new usual space in our house. So the only one I could go, it was like away from the noise, was my garage. So I was like giving classes there, and I did that one. I remember sitting there, but that's a fun backdrop to that story. But yeah, and I think that time where it's like, I probably spent more time then online, and I'm talking about reading all that, but in this case, like watching videos and thinking about different things, where over that year, and the comic you're referring to, I think, was just, that really floored me, of like, what a great perspective to think about, because if we're cynical, we're just criticizing everything. We're a company, whatever else, we just find a way to demonize them and then cast them aside as if, oh, that's the complete story. But I love the idea of, skeptic has to do the work, and can dig into things, can figure out, like, all right, how do I understand multiple perspectives? How do I try to find more information? Specifically, I like the idea of financial filings, because it's like 120 pages, 140 pages, and there's a lot of stuff that's not useful. But it's like, yeah, but you work through that, you'll find, like, the company themselves, they give additional detail. And then, as you were saying, like, look at other perspectives, look at what people are saying, try to gather that all in. And I think, I agree with that for humans, but obviously as an educator, I think one of the standard I have to hold myself to is I have to walk in to class and try to obtain a variety of perspectives on the company we're going to talk about, or the topic we're going to talk about. And then the other thing, which I really love about my job, back to the idea of why, a larger quantity is not so bad, is you learn a lot from students too. I mean, I like talking about companies because, especially when I've taught working professionals, where you're going to get people who, like, this is an awesome fact about our jobs. I know that I'm going to have like a slide, in my deck that I'm going to talk about, and there might be 2 or 3 people that know more about that slide than I do in like any class. I'm going to say, on average, I know more about the deck than anyone in the room. But it's like, yeah, but I'm going to cover something, and there's going to be someone who's like, actually, I've spent like the last 6 years of my life doing this or that. And I love when those opportunities come up, and like, I'm just sitting there like, oh, thank you. I'm just like, yes, tell me. Yeah. And I try to pepper them with questions. We did this much in my evening MBA class, like pepper them with questions to get more out of it. Yeah. And then I'm just sitting there like, I'm going to use this in the future. Just like, wow, that opportunity to learn. It's like, I think we undersell that aspect about academia. And it's like, you're sitting there, you got a class of 40 or 60 people, whatever it is, but like, it's not every person is adding value on every topic, but like, you should be walking out of a, 3-hour, 4-hour class. Like, man, I gained a ton here. I gained a ton here. I gained a ton here. So I think the other aspect of skepticism to me is like, even when I'm like, oh, I'm ready because I did my work and I polished it and I'm ready to go on my slides, it's like, I still have to have the open mind at that moment of like, yeah, you know what? There's still going to, every moment there's going to be, I've taught that class, that, topic, whatever, X amount of years, different audiences. There's still going to be somebody in the room who's going to be like, well, what about this? And then it's just like, we have to be appreciative in many ways and open to like, awesome, you're giving me education. I'm getting paid for you to teach me effectively in that moment.
I feel like that's a very important point, actually, if you think about it, because a lot of times students think of teachers and teaching as a one-way street, right? Like, and that's what stops. And, I've recently been working with a bunch of undergrads, so it's been really refreshing to just see how they think and how, and the common theme I've seen is like just the hesitancy and anxiety of asking a question because you don't want to sound dumb and all that stuff, right? But like this, to this point of yours, the teacher is probably learning a lot through that process as you bring up anything. Like it's hard to remember that as a student, that it's kind of like this self-fulfilling sort of feedback loop where as soon as you add to the conversation, you're adding to the learnings of everyone, including the teacher, right? So it's an interesting sort of way that I think we should reframe that sort of mindset a little bit on teaching and learning.
I completely agree. And you were mentioning this earlier, like the lecture versus discussion is a huge, it's crazy that we're still using lecture. And I don't know, I've not taught a class of like 300 or 400, so I don't want to but like if you have a class of 40, I've done this with a class of 80, that's the biggest I've done. But it's like, and that's actually kind of hard. That pushes up where it makes that harder. But I would say, in 40 and 60, it's like we should be held accountable for like, can you hold a discussion with that audience? And I think that's a big change. The other thing is, I just way too much of an emphasis on, a deliverable being an exam, which again is that like one way. I give you information, you like furiously write it down during class and like make sure you get everything. And then you give it back to me on the exam and we act like we're both doing, high five, like we did a great job, as opposed to like, I've done some surveys that shows like a lot of that stuff, and others have done this too. So I like reading academic research on like how people think and effective teaching methods, but a lot of that's lost in, weeks later, the next semester kind of scenario where it is just very, very, very short term. That like lecture at, student receives, students puts back on the exam. And you just said this, I really want to agree that like we should disrupt that. We should, move it more towards a discussion. That doesn't mean it's super easy or you can't figure out, determining grades and everything else. But I am a huge fan of and try to live the idea that like it should be this dynamic setting, not a listen to me and then repeat thing.
I wanna kind of go a little bit more into a book you recommended all of us when we started out. I think you recommended probably in all your classes is Range. And why is that book important for someone, especially thinking about careers? From that lens, like why do you think that is such an important book to read? And what have been your lessons for the education system through that book?
Yeah, can I go back a little bit here? So like in May of 2023, I came across Founders Podcast and it was just massively affirming, as I was mentioning. In May or April, I think it was April of 2024, a former student of mine, just reached out on LinkedIn. She's basically like, hey, you're going to love this book. It seems like it's all the stuff you were doing and trying to do in class. And then I bought it, and she was a great student. So I was like, her perspective matters. Just the way interaction there, like super dynamic in the room. But and I read it, and I was like, this was just like, I'm just reading it like, yes, like I'm like sitting there like like fist pumping while I'm reading a book, and like I've had Founders
just in your garage.
This is not but it's like the same thing. It's like I'm like, so that one I read, but like the same thing with Founders. Like I'm listening to episodes, and I'm like, yes, exactly. Like I'm talking back to it, like. I love that idea, but like in this one, I'm like, oh, this is so good. Like my copy is like super dog-eared and like notes over everything. And, bring this into class. This is exactly this, or this is the evidence I need here. Put this in the third, like different classes of like stuff I want to do. And I've brought it into the class after that point because I think there were so many good comments there. In general. So one, super affirming to me. Chapter 4 covers a lot about academia, things we talked about. How do we break out of silos? That's I think another problem there. But in general, what I really like about that book more broadly, which was your question, I don't want you to overlook it in any way, was just that it seems like it's a good and much needed take on like we all get way too siloed, and it's okay to like not know what we want to do early. It's great to experiment, and I think it's on page 290.
Why is it okay? Let me just kind of push you in that. Why is it okay to not know?
Well, I think that's the value of the book, David Epstein's book, which is that he walks through exactly why and how. It's like you can learn from these experiences, and it also enables you, like if I can interpret it a little bit here, to be more adaptive with how you think about problems, how you approach things. And the overly siloed approach, there's some good examples there in science, in business. He starts with sports, but he goes into so many different areas. But it's like you're more adaptable and you're better at the thing you eventually specialize in if you have that broader training, because you've seen the words are in there like I don't know. These words actually seem like kind of like the kind world versus the wicked world, I think is the way. And it's like those, like that language seems off-putting, but like the core idea is awesome. Like the wicked world is the world we live in. Like there's chaos. It's not like everything's bad, but it's like there's noise, there's chaos, there's uncertainty, there's unpredictability. And that broad background is much better at dealing with that. You know, the kind world, like if I see this, I do this, algorithmic, like I can build everything into a perfect little algorithm. That's obviously worked in very unique situations. And I think it does a great job of proving that. Like, it's not that that doesn't ever work, but the situations it works in is pretty unique. And then I would argue there, like we all talk about AI now, like that would be my worry. It's like, wait, I'm learning a skill in a graduate program that's like replicable and I can feel good while I'm going through it. But wouldn't that be something that's very easily, you know, done by a computer system, whatever else can be fully automated? Alternatively, you know, I have to make decisions that are dynamic. I have to make decisions where I don't know, where there's a massive amount of unpredictability. And I think the evidence that David Epstein's offering in Range is that the varied backgrounds, the like, quote, slow to develop or whatever, might actually make you more nimble, more able to, you know, reason by analogy, work through things that you encounter in the future. So it's like, you know, patience in some ways, build up diverse skill sets. In the long run, you'd even be better at the thing that you choose to specialize in or to do.
It's a fascinating sort of thing to think about because it's sort of counterintuitive, but it actually makes a lot of sense. And for a class like ours at MSTC, where everyone comes from so many different backgrounds, yesterday I was talking to a friend of mine and I was telling her about our conversation today. She doesn't know about, like, she knows about the MSTC, but she's not part of it. And she's like, and we were talking about Range as the book, and she was like, it seems like your professor like has specialized in something and the people around them are all generalists. So you're able to apply like a specialized field into so many general areas. And I feel like that's like a combination that you create with your students is like this accounting as the focus, but just applying it in so many different ways. And I feel like that just ties in with the theme of this book as well, which is very interesting to me.
Yeah, and I'd argue to our earlier point too, like, and like I have to be willing to learn from you guys. Like, your class is really unique because like the demographics of the student are so diverse.
Yeah.
Like that program has always been that way, and I think it makes it really fascinating. Where like just relative to a traditional MBA program or an MPA program, the MSF program, the other ones I teach in, is just that you walk in like there's no like, oh, most of the students do this or most of them do that. It's like you're all over the place, which I think makes it kind of fun and invigorating. Obviously more challenging, but yeah, it's like a bigger stretch to how do I apply it? How do I make it relevant?
What's the bigger challenge there for you?
It's just that I myself, as you said, can get siloed. Like just thinking more about like valuation and forecasting and kind of the intersection of accounting and finance roles and
EBITDA.
Yeah. I think I've always done a good job of not being like strict accounting. And I think like a lot of finance always attracted me too. So like my other classes, I think very naturally intersect between the two. And I think we in academia are way too siloed between accounting and finance, like acting like they're not related. But I think in your class, it's even broader than that. It's not bridging a gap between two related areas. It's trying to bridge gaps between seemingly very unrelated areas. So it's just an extra level of integration, extra level of being interdisciplinary. I mean, I think I would definitely say I try to bring that to every class, but it's like, at how many levels do you have to bring it? I think yours would be a few more.
I wanna talk about labels for a little bit. Again, as part of this same speech that you gave in McCombs, you talked about labels and the sort of what you specifically talked about here was how labels give the authority or the aura of authority and feel sufficiently good on the surface, but labels aren't substance. Labels are shortcuts. So my question to you is, a label acts like a filtering system in some ways, right? Like imagine if we did not have a label. If we didn't have you had a PhD in this thing, that is a label. I have an MS, that's a label. Like, what would the world look like without labels?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. I don't have a good answer for, but I still want to kind of go back to that speech where, and I was laughing when you were saying that because I've read that again after the fact, and that's one of the parts I think is most important. Like, and I thought about that after I wrote it. Like, do I continue to hold myself to that standard? And so, labels aren't going away. credentialing, as you're mentioning, whatever else is not going away. But I still think we can de-emphasize that as the end result. And I've done this even more in my other class where like I will intentionally take a top tier publication, a top tier investment bank, a top tier academic institution and use their work and specifically use it to point out that there's flaws. Like that's like the end result. And some classes I've actually started off with like, look, here's the conclusion. I'll give you the answer. Let's work towards it. Like this perspective, this article's a dud and let's figure out why. But I'm doing that when like, wait, how could you say that about, this top tier institution? So I think we massively overemphasize credentialing. I think that's actually related to some of the stuff in range. And it's not that we will not have labels, but if we use them, that's a shortcut. It offers some value, but if we stop there, then like, so we were talking earlier about a skeptic and a cynic. Like a cynic disregards things. But the other part of that, which is not mentioned, which is fine, is that like just the person who accepts things at their face value. And that's hey, all I need is a label and then I'm done. And it's like, well, that's a mistake too. I'm a cynic, so I dismiss everything. I don't know what the exact term I'd use there, but like, because it's not an optimist, but it's like, I'm just extremely gullible, so I accept everything. And I don't think. And in either case, a label's incorrect because, it's just the starting point. And then we have to figure out what's the substance behind it. How do I dig deeper into the rest of the story? So yeah, I don't think we'll ever, you earlier just a moment ago mentioned EBITDA, but it's like, that's like a superficial label we use, in valuation, in finance, analyzing companies. And it's like, there's a bias to the label first. And which means that we have to understand that what are the incentives behind who's using it? What's the pressure to use it and how can it be biased? And bias doesn't mean bad. It just means dig in, figure out what's going on. And then there's a laziness to it, which is like, oh, this is all I have. So it like sounds sufficiently sophisticated. It's the same thing with like, oh, this person has this academic credential, this degree or these years of experience. But like we're using that as a rule of thumb, as a heuristic without thinking about, well, that's not a guarantee of, the best result or whatever else. You still have to find support. So I was laughing again when you were saying that. I just think that like, that's the important part of what I see as my like academic vocation, which is like, try to point out the flaws of superficial labels because they exist everywhere. And I specifically like doing that in like applications of analyzing companies. But I would hope that, that there's broad applications to that across life.
Do you ever look at companies without knowing what the company, like what the name of the company is? Like you just look at the financials of a company and you're like, I'm just thinking about how even just naming an apple, for example, creates a level of like trust, right? Do you ever think of it like that? Like looking at a company without seeing the name or anything around it to remove the bias?
That's a great question. So I have assignments in my financial statement analysis class where I force that on students because I went and removed all the company identifiers. I've got like 2 cases where I do this and I do them at the beginning of the semester. They're kind of fun. And I reveal who the company is later. So I make that as I think it's a great skill set. And it's funny that you're asking that of me, but my answer is no. But I just don't know how to do that. Like, it's like, how do I do that to myself?
Yeah.
How do I like run an experiment on myself? I guess I probably could, but no, I've never done that. And so there's like that, like I've never truly been in that situation that I'm asking my students to be in, but I try to kind of get at like hey, what are my biases here and how do I sort of see the other side? But I think it's a great exercise. It's just funny that, it's one I've never done, but I don't know that it's that easy to do. Like, is there a way to scrape all that information and look at it?
I don't know. I feel like you just have to build another like founder's notes like thing where you just build like the entire financial data of all the different companies and just go like, give me a financial data of one company without telling me the name or some shit like that. I don't know.
So then this is funny back to labels. I was doing work with Harvard Business Publishing and one of the cases we did was like, I just had to write like little company bios and then they were attached to company financial statements. And I think anyone can get access to it, but like you can do it. It's a simulation where you're like, you get a little bit of data, you have to figure out who the company is. And I was doing the teaching note for this and I was like, I was just like a ton of fun to write. I was like, oh man, like how do I go? And I was writing like to a professor, like how do you, whatever somebody's using this, they can download it. Like, how do you work through like, okay, if you see this, then what questions do you ask? Or this level of inventory should be what? And these kind of margins should lead to what? And okay, this company has a greater amount of working capital. What would be consistent with that? This company has their balance sheet is far less important. There's not much on it. What kind of business is related to that? Just some examples of like, that was again, I like doing that class a version of that in my class. I do that. I make all my students do that. And then too, it was fun to like write that of like, how do I guide somebody through this lesson? But again, I've never literally looked at something without knowing who the company was.
I almost feel like you're driven by the fact that you're driven by truth seeking. It seems like a lot of like what you want to do in education, but outside of education too, is just seeking the truth. Would that be an accurate sort of statement?
I hope so. That's what I aspire for. I appreciate you saying that. I would say innate curiosity, and I believe those are, highly related. That if you truly have innate curiosity, you likely are seeking some idea of truth. That's an aspiration. That's not something I'd say like, oh, I've perfectly achieved that. But yeah, I think so. And I would argue that like I'm doing it in a realm of specialization or expertise when it comes to looking at company financials or making those assessments. But, I hope there's value to that everywhere. And I hope someone is, one of the things I love when I do these surveys at the end of my semesters, and it's like what I'm like, the affirmation I get from students is when somebody's basically saying like something along the lines of, I realized either during the semester or that like it helped me in something totally unrelated to classes. Like that is just, yes, that's like awesome. Or the other one is, I realize a lot of things you were talking about, and so I think you're kind of mentioning this yourself, is like relate to just life. Like, because aren't we all like humans making decisions with information? And we're not talking about balance sheets and income statements most of the time.
Yeah.
But like, aren't we still making decisions with like, wait, what's the other side to this perspective? And like, how do I flesh things out or whatever else? And so, the terms and the metrics would be fundamentally different. But I love when someone's like, I realize a lot of these things are just like, like humans making decisions across life. I'm like, yeah, I hope that like, I'm not saying that every day because I can't, but that's why I like bringing in perspectives from books, from podcasts and everything else, of like, because I hope that shows that like, this is it's not just this company. It's not just this set of financial statements. It's not just this footnote that matters here. It's what could I do with this, or where else could I apply this as a person?
I saw that, I think on LinkedIn, you had posted about, and time has flown by, I just realized. On LinkedIn, you had posted about your undergrad classes. You had 2 of them, and you kind of did an A/B test on them, where you like gave one of the classes, you added the podcast and stuff like that as part of their slides, versus the other one where you like removed that or something, and you saw like a statistically significant level of interaction in one versus the other. You know what I'm talking about here?
I do. Can I slightly tweak that? It's a little different.
Go ahead.
So in the spring, I was asked by my department to kind of teach our intro class to our undergrads, and the argument was the material may need a little bit of an update. And interestingly, the professors teaching are wonderful, amazing people, and they've done really well in like the evaluation scores, and have great reputations as just being super helpful and all these other qualities that we want in educators. But my question was always about, is the content of the material different? So it wasn't actually 2 of my classes, but I did 2 sections, and then there were other professors doing different sections, and we had like a standardized survey at the beginning and the end. And what I was given free rein to do was to sort of move away from the traditional materials and actually, to be clear, do whatever I wanted. I mean, like I had topics to cover, but like I could do podcasts. This is undergrad class. It was like 40% freshmen, 40% sophomores, maybe, and a little bit of mix after that. But I could do a little bit of, okay, how do you, let's talk about companies. I had them do a project where we had to analyze Dutch Bros, Wingstop, or Shake Shack, and like getting them into like, wait, I'm not, as a freshman, I want you to go out and analyze this. And my assignment is not like calculate these ratios. It's, think about their income statement and tell me what's happening. Look at their statement of cash flows. So I was intentionally making it more of like, look, here's my list of ratios. I mean, I gave them that sheet and everything calculated, but it was, that's too many for them to use, but there is no like, do these 5 calculations, do this thing, and then tell me whether they improved or deteriorated or whatever else. So that free range in the class, I think, was valuable. And I think that, there's people who didn't like the class at all. It was very clear because I think they're more used to like give me the stuff on the exam, and it was more discussion based, more
completely structured.
Yeah. And I think, so there's always that. That's a challenge. It's a risk you face. But it was fun to do. And I think what was affirming to me was to realize like, look, these are all, our undergrads are, I mostly teach graduate students. And so I would argue the undergraduate student audience demands that. Like if you were to just kind of sit there and cover basic things, like they would come up very quickly. And I think graduate students would do something about it. I'm not so sure that undergrads are willing and able to kind of do that, like to speak out and say like, this is not that good of an experience. So I was thinking that like, well, if they're demanding it, the only question is not whether it's good for the undergrads, because if people that they want to be in 5 or 6 or 10 years are offering that, the question is like, are they ready for it? Which I didn't know. And I think the answer was for the vast majority of them, a resounding yes. So I got away from that. Like, are we just under challenging? We're like assuming that I give you information, you repeat it back to me is what's best for that student because that's what we're all doing, as opposed to like, no, push them a little bit, challenge a little bit. And, they'll rise to the occasion. It's funny, on that class, I just got a LinkedIn message from one of my students who's taking a finance class. And he was kind of like, look, I have to do this question from McGraw-Hill, this online thing. And range actually shows why that kind of learning is really bad. And so I didn't use that. That was actually a thing we used to do in the intro accounting class, like use this McGraw-Hill thing. And I'm basically like, I'm not using it. I'm not touching that. I want to do unique assignments. And then it's just like you could see like his frustration of like, man, you're giving us this opportunity, and now I feel like I'm regressing because now I have to like I have to repeat answers so that I can get things completed on this like online like program. And you could just like, I think it's like, wow, an affirmation of I appreciated what we were doing in the spring, but then like, man, have I regressed because now I'm just I'm repeating phrases. And he was pointing out that one of the phrases was nonsense, but it's like I know what the answer is. I know I have to say it to move on, to go to the next whatever. But it's like there's no thought. It's just repeating.
It's I remember like during COVID, I was in Portland and I was with my aunt. She lives there, and we were having this conversation on, do you think experience is determined by time that you've been in something versus the amount of active like time you've spent doing something and reflecting on it? So what determines as like experience? Is there a person who's had 10 years of experience, he's been in the same thing for 10 years versus someone who's been in it for 3 years, but let's just say the 10-year person spent 3 hours every day, but the person who's been there for 3 years spent 14 hours every day. Who has more experience in that scenario? Like, what are your thoughts on what does experience mean? And also touch a little bit on the traps of having experience. What can that lead you to?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I want to go back again to founders. It was Bob is his first name. I don't know his last name. And I'm terrible with pronunciations anyway. So the founder of Fastenal was on there, and he made that comment of like, the 10 years of experience versus one. And we both kind of skipped the intro part, which I think is the most important to answer your question. It was the desire to learn. Like that starts with like, if you've lost the desire to learn, if you have desire to learn, that's like when you'll, I think, do two things. So, is it time? Because you were laying that out. I was like, well, you could kind of half-ass it. I don't know if I can say that, but like, and put in 3 hours a day or put in 14. So time is an element, but it also is likely like how you approach, how you think. So it may not just be a time or quantifiable thing like that, but when you're there doing whatever amount of hours, how are you thinking about it? How are you thinking about how to learn, how to change, how to develop? So I think I want to emphasize that. And again, it's not my original idea, but to see that as like, how important it is to us for like to never to lose the desire to learn. I think that's more important than the time. But my guess is, just bringing some cohesiveness to our entire conversation. If you have that desire to learn, you're probably willing to put in more hours. That'd be like, I'd bet anything that that's the case, that like they're correlated, where the desire to learn can increase the amount of time spent, and a lack of a desire to learn is going to push you more towards like, I just do what I need to do to get through this or that. And then the second thing you're saying is like, what's the potential drawback of more experience? I think with the desire to learn, probably nothing. But without it, I think then it's like, then we get too siloed, and then we get too set in our ways. And I'm going to attribute a quote to Mark Twain. Others have surely said a version of this, but it's like, it's not what we don't know that gets us into trouble. It's what we know for sure that just ain't so. And it's like that. I think the more we get into that, credentialing those labels, that kind of stuff, and not thinking about what else do I have to learn, then I'd be willing to bet that individual is more inclined to offer that, hey, like I know it all, and therefore I don't really need to, or don't need to care about what I don't know or whatever else. So I think that over specialization, kind of that status quo bias, getting comfortable and losing desire to learn, likely is attributable toward like a higher level of overconfidence or a lack of knowledge of what we don't know.
So I want to ask you this because you've been in the same thing for over 15 years, right? Would you say that's fine?
Yeah, 14. Well,
14. Okay.
No, I don't agree.
Let's
with
be
what you said.
specific. 14. All right, 14 years. So
14 and a little more. Anyway.
So what's have you had phases where you have not had the desire to continue on in this profession?
Yeah, I was sorry. We're sitting in person when you're asking questions. Like, I love them all. But I also was laughing a little bit at them. I would say not the same thing. This is another fun thing. I've never had a year in my little over 14 years where I did the same like courses. Like, my schedule has changed every single year. And I was actually asking my chair that, I was like, has anyone else done that? I was like, this seems like I'm asked to do a lot of change. And like next year will be the same, I'll change again. So I've never had like, because there have been years I'm like, oh, that was an awesome schedule. Like,
Yeah.
and I've even said that, like, I would do that again if I ever get the chance. I just don't have control over that. So I've never had like, semesters are always different, and then even years. So I've always had some degree of like chaos, like do this. I've been asked to like be kind of a utility player. So okay, this isn't going well, fix it. So that's
But
one thing.
is it been all in accounting?
Sort of, but like my kind of a mix of accounting and finance. So I teach traditional accounting stuff.
Okay.
I've also do a class that's kind of a mix of accounting and finance, and then in McCombs I teach in MBA programs, MSF, which is it's a degree in finance. So they take a few accounting classes. I teach 3 of the 4 I think they take, or 3 of the 5 they can take, and then in your class, which is really not accounting or finance at all, the MSTC program is much more about entrepreneurship. But then I'd argue, it's marketing and strategy and those kind of the other skills that we cover in an MBA program. So a little bit of variety there in teaching in different programs. A ton of variety in the audiences, as we were mentioning before. That makes it pretty interesting. But none of that really directly addresses your question. To address it, yes, I think that's why I like to reconsider and create things. But the one time it was really challenging for me was just teaching online and doing Zoom classes. It was tough. It was like the first time I felt like, to your earlier point, like I was punching it, like I was watching the time. I was thinking about when it's done.
Wow.
Like when I teach a class in person, I'm like, I'm always thinking like, I wish there was more time. Like I sincerely would just stick around. I know that you have to finish it, like, but I would stick around. And sometimes I have for like an hour or 2 after class talking to people. But like Zoom was the one time where it's like, I can't, when's this going to be done? And it was then where I just realized like it was so different. And I was at like a deficit in terms of a bunch of skills. Like one, it was just little things I didn't like. You didn't realize it until they were gone. One, you can't reading a room is so essential. Micro expressions, all these things, like watching people do different things. And it doesn't mean I'm doing it perfectly. I'm looking at everybody. Of course I'm not. But like, that's a huge part of teaching, especially when you want to do a conversation. And then
You're kind of like a stand-up comic.
Sorry?
You're kind of like a stand-up comic.
It's funny you say that. Like, I love watching that. It's like my guilty pleasure on my phone of like, one of the like little videos I like to watch on like is like actually stand-up comics. Like I love watching them at their craft. Like, it's the thing I really think is, I'm not that, but like I love that idea. And so I watch a lot of like, when I'm like watching little short videos to waste time, it's like, that's the one thing I really like is like watching stand-up comics.
No, but you really are in some ways, because it's not a one-way flow of conversation. So it actually is, people are constantly interacting with you, and they're kind of, you're interacting with them, and it's a build-up of conversation. I actually think you're a stand-up comic for education. Let's just say it that way.
All right, works. It's to your earlier point though. The comics I probably like better, are like the ones who do that. Like I think I like a variety, but it's like I love the ones who
Like the crowd work stuff.
Yeah, they can do it, and you're like, man, that's cool. Like I'm just watching that. Like what a skill set to learn. Like which is different from like the comics I don't like are just the one-liners. Like there's 2 things I think I like in a comic is like, can you like deliver a a good story and like the layers to the story make it awesome and like the pauses and all that. But, like one-line jokes I don't find funny at all. Like, yeah, I get it, but like that's not interesting to me. I don't want to watch that. Or it's that like, can you interact either with positively with the crowd or like with the heckler? Like those are both pretty cool skills.
Who's a comedian you watch?
I was trying to think of it. There's I forget his name. He's on the Daily Show now. I was talking to my friend about this, but is it Josh Johnson or something like that? And I was thinking, like his delivery. He's a young guy, but his like delivery and like I just like the topics he covers, and he's just like this like amazingly unassuming delivery. But it's like he just tells the story really well. You were mentioning Charlie Brand's actually kind of like. I mean, his stuff's a little bit more slapstick, but he's done some stuff. And there's another guy, I forget. He's online. I don't know. I should pay attention.
Andrew Schultz.
I don't know, but it's just more of I don't even look at the names that closely. No, he's like he's done ones where he deals with hecklers really well. I wish I knew his name. It's like Hofstetter maybe or something like that.
Okay.
He's like he's got like red hair. He's kind of a taller guy, but like
anyway.
I've seen ones where he's like dealing with hecklers.
Yeah,
that's pretty good.
I mean, the amount of creativity in that moment is insane.
I mean, I don't know about editing, right? So it's like because you're seeing clips, I don't know, but it's like you have to assume that like man, the ability to think on your feet. And I've seen them one do it. They're like they make that comment. They're like. They'll say something like, I'm a professional at this. It's just funny. It's like, oh, yeah, they are. They're like, that's their job. And someone in the audience is like, man, that's I'm guessing it's probably, related to inebriation or something else like that. But like, what makes the person in the audience be like, I'm going to take on a comic at like their skill set? So I don't know. It's funny. I like that idea. Like, that's like I always see that as like it's not the craft I'm in, but it's related, and I think there are like overlapping skills. So it's funny that like I like watching it for enjoyment, but I like watching it for like out of appreciation of like somebody. It's the same way I like watching football, and it's like it's appreciation of like man, they're doing something pretty amazing.
Yeah,
that's awesome to do that. Same thing.
Yeah, just seeing them in their game, I think is an amazing thing to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to move the conversation a little bit more towards, the education system, I guess, or teaching. You talked a little bit about how you started teaching, earlier versus now, how it's changed. But I'm curious to know more about how has your teaching changed over the years? What have you incorporated? I mean, podcast is like the most high level thing I can see. You're the first person I've seen incorporate media like that into their learning, and I can bet you that that's going to be a very popular thing later on, like 10 years from now in a college setting, because every other professor that is now moving outside of just their college to push out content is doing basically the same thing. They're creating these podcasts, or they're creating just content on YouTube or LinkedIn. So it makes complete sense for them to start building in that same kind of model into their own teaching, or others bring their content onto their teaching. I feel like it's going to be the future in some ways of content.
Yeah, I like being a guest and stuff like that. I don't like have my own podcast, and I've created materials, but they're all kind of, I think I have a different reason for that, which is just to show that like, hey, it's not just my perspective. And I like when it's not even, I was using a lot of, Barry Ritholtz has a really good podcast, Masters of Business, the first one I really got into. And it's kind of wonky. It's really well done, but like it directly related to the class. So I have them filter through my financial statement analysis slides. Like I got one coming up on Monday. It's awesome. It's really interesting, and it like brings home a point. But one, it's like to emphasize that like this isn't, it's not just, here are my thoughts. It's like, here are others who are sharing similar things in that realm. But then actually the other thing I love about Founders and the Acquired podcast is a phenomenal one. Business Breakdowns is phenomenal. Where other ones are more related to class. Like I've done Motley Fool Money, and that's great, but it's like very specific to class. Masters in Business, very specific to class. But I like the ones that are actually not, and for this reason. A bunch of the HBR Idea casts have been great for this, which is to show that like we can make the connection to something that's outside of the specific topic. That like back to our earlier conversations of like there's a lesson just generally speaking about humans, understanding human nature. And this is something really interesting to me about Founders specifically, but all of them are excellent in like showing how things relate. That like there's not a single podcast episode of Founders, and I still have like 100 or something to go out of 360 to listen to, that like is focusing on someone who's an accountant, like actually an accountant, and that was their like massive innovation. He's got individuals who made a big difference in marketing and but like there isn't one. But many of them actually like sort of learned accounting and then moved on. And I find that fascinating. Of like, it's such a great skill set to think about understanding businesses or to think about understanding cost. And it's almost like I was thinking about using Founders Notes, what you set me up with, of like to go back and like to pull out the pieces that are in Founders podcast of like why and how, accounting, the lens of the language into the business, what the business is doing, is so valuable. But to be clear, like for someone who has no interest in being an accountant, it's like that's maybe it's my ear more attuned to that and confirmation bias. But I love hearing that like this person's career had nothing to do with accounting, but like they benefited so much from being able to put these things together in a financial sense. So relate it, but also outside of the core subject matter. So like I think it's a great thing to do in academia, is like to show the application of what we're covering from other people and then in other settings.
And have you've always done that in different ways since you started teaching?
Oh, no, sorry. To your earlier point, which I didn't really cover. No, I don't know when I started doing that. I had a student. I had a student in a, I should name everybody. The student Miranda gave me the Range podcast. This was actually Austin. He just made this comment in passing. I don't remember it being, but it's just like just talking about how he listened to a bunch of podcasts. It's like, we have so much time. And I was like, yeah, when that like just stuck with me, I was like, why am I not listening to more podcasts? And I started to. So this was 2019, 2020, somewhere around there where I started doing this, but it wasn't before that. Like I'd bet there was a huge shift where there was, occasionally a book or two or something like that, to like now where it's like, one of the students like graduated in 2021 said something like, you got 50 podcast recommendations in every class. Like it's too much. Like I wish you would like just give us the one or two to listen to. So at some point I switched, and I don't know, it just was more of like, it was just a brilliant insight of like, wait a second. I like how much time we waste by not consuming things. And I'm going to go to an episode I was listening today in Founders where he was just talking about Charlie Munger. It's like, I'm never wasting time because I always have a book on me. And that's not me. I don't always have a book on me, but it's like, I try to do that with like, hey, why am I not, why not listen to someone? And it's not, there are podcasts I think are not worth the time, but like, what if it's one that's just, it's giving me perspective, it's giving me insight on something. So I try to, if I'm cleaning something in my house, like why am I not also trying to get a chance to learn from someone else? So, like we have many times we're doing mundane tasks, combine that with, some opportunity to keep learning.
Wow. So speaking on beliefs that you hold about education, I think this is going to be a little bit on our earlier conversation, but what is a belief about education that you hold to be true that others disagree with? I've taken this from Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1, where he talks about this broadly. Is like, if you want to think about creating something, what is something you truly believe in that others don't believe in, but within education?
Yeah, I was worried like this could be a really long conversation. I think I disagree with many things, and I always worry like maybe too much. And we've talked about a bunch of these, so it's like, a few of them. I think one, we are way too siloed. In like the way we do departments, the way we do classes. I've been told that from people like, an equivalent of like stay in your lane, like you're just an accounting professor. Why are you teaching forecasting or valuation? What this doesn't make any sense to me. Like that is scary of a perspective there. And I think one, like we're way too siloed. We should all actively work to think about how do I bring my conversation together. I've made this comment in a teaching statement or something at one point in the past, which was like what I referred to as like one McCombs, like we should de-emphasize, this is also related to range, we should de-emphasize majors and emphasize like you should be here to like take classes about business. And you need some degree of like school, so you can't just have everything overlap, but like it's crazy that we're like, hey, you senior in college, you should know your major. Like we society there, and then like, oh, you need to choose it soon, and if you don't, like, as opposed to like, all right, so if you're interested in business, come here, take classes, and then later figure out a little bit of a career path there. So one, way too siloed. And that's, we're all like, society is, you 17, 18-year-old, like what's the main, okay, once somebody finds out you're going to college, like what's your major going to be? And like, if you don't have one,
Which
like,
college are you going to, and what's your major?
exactly. And if you don't have that, no one is like, oh, awesome. Like, you really should embrace the chance to learn. Like,
Yeah.
it's usually like, oh, like, why haven't you figured out your life yet? And the answer should be like, because no one has at 17, but we don't. That's one big thing.
Do you think people figure out their life at some point?
Yeah, I hope maybe, or their direction, but the percent of people that are doing that when they're in high school or the first 2 years of college has to be very close to few.
One of the podcasts I did 2 weeks ago was with a guy at Learn, and Learn is a VC that invests in education-based companies, and he took 2 gap years when he was 17. He went to an institute where he was from, where he did a personality test. And they gave him like a massive 15-page report on like the different things that he could fit in terms of careers and stuff. And he just went ahead and tried all the different careers that were given to him for the next 2 years. So he tried real estate. He became a real estate broker Yeah. Then he tried being a mediator, like a Texas mediator that helps others figure out like how to come together on like disputes they're having and stuff.
Yeah.
Broke into the film industry.
Yeah.
For those 2-3 years, he just like did these bunch of things, and so he now kind of has like a framework for like trying to try new things.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing is, in that moment, everyone was just telling him, "Why are you doing this?" Right? Like it's like everyone else is going to college. Why are you doing this? And in some weird way, like 6-7 years later, he's now also in the ed tech space where he's just investing in the best companies that are coming out right now, and they're based in Austin. So it's a very like, there is no one set path to finding the outcome you're looking at, and psychology has a term called Equifinality, which is basically to get the patient in like a psychologist to help get a patient into the same outcome for all the different patients. They go and try a bunch of different methods, and I think that's where education is still lagging, is opening up the different methods to go to the same outcome. Like, why is a business student or a undergrad not able to take... I was trying to take a class with Mark Bunting, who's one of the professors. I don't know if you know him. He teaches advertising in undergrad. I was trying to take a class with him. I could not, just because my major only lets me take these classes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why can I not, as a student, just go and learn something that I'm interested in?
Yeah.
There's a limitation to that.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, we should change that. But I don't have any, ability to change that. But I think, you're mentioning this individual, the VC, and I feel like that's also like, that's why I love and recommend the book Range. It's like don't feel behind, but like that those things are probably better. That like we do that at society do that at such a early age that we should stop, and then we should think about like, flexibility. It is crazy to think that like you couldn't at least, even if there is a path, hey, you're in this major, take this path, but there's not an option of like, hey, can I petition for this and get some ability to say, look, we don't want you to do nothing, but like, hey, this class could be massively valuable, even if it's not one of these set things in some handbook or whatever else. Like, like everyone should have the option of like, or, get approval from blah, 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 blah. I get the idea that maybe you want approval or somebody to sign off on something. But, like every department's major course catalog at the registrar level should have an asterisk. That's like, and you can also do this. And I would say, is that for all? Maybe not, but like, hey, that person who's taking the initiative to find the class and then, articulate their paragraph on why it's valuable. I don't know why we would stop them.
Last question for you, and this is more on mentorship. I saw that you had some mentors in your when you were doing your undergrad, or like 2 professors that you particularly named. One of them in philosophy. I wanted to get your thoughts on mentorship. Like where do you see mentorship fit in the education space? Like, and how do you how much value do you put to mentorship as a way of like learning in your career?
It's interesting. I think here's my big broad take is like, we should all find mentors in many different ways, and in many ways unexpectedly. That'd be my thought. That like, be open to anyone being your mentor. Some are more direct, and I two that I mentioned, like John Imvar, my philosophy professor in undergrad, and then Noah Barsky was my accounting professor. Direct in terms of like, man, I love the way that Noah Barsky taught accounting, and still stay in touch with him. But like, it's really awesome to see firsthand. And that kind of was like my first love, if I may, of like, oh, this, talk about businesses, not just cover journal entries. And he was big on like not doing memorization and regurgitation and stuff like that. So it was like his pedagogical methods and the way he approached it, I really, stayed with me, obviously. When I took the philosophy class, I think it was really interesting of like, John Imvar was an amazing professor, but like, and the crazy thing is like, I didn't get a lot of that stuff. Like I was a business student in this like intensive interdisciplinary program for 3 semesters with liberal arts and other students like that. There's 20 of us or something like that. And I remember always feeling like, man, I'm so far behind them. And I would go to like my business class and be like, these are so easy. Because it's like, it was reading and going through stuff. And like, I would actually love to go back and really like, man, if I read that stuff again, I'd get so much more out of it now, just with life and maturity and everything else. But what I liked about that is it was called interdis, but I think he got the idea of like that program was designed to like bring together the classes. And like that idea also stuck with me, and like, oh yeah, that's a really good way to teach. And then philosophy, like, I was taking philosophy classes and literature and theology and aspects like that. We took a theater class in that sequencing, but like all of that was like, oh yeah, this does relate. It's learning things doesn't have to be so, back to my earlier point, compartmentalized or siloed.
Or linear.
Yeah, exactly, yes. And then the other thing I'll say is this, is like mentors, like, I don't know, I've also feel like I don't know if we'll have time for this, but one of the questions you were asking me was just about like, growing up when we were prepping for this, like, what are the impactful things? And one of them to me was actually working. So my parents had a conversation with me, I think it's sophomore year of high school, of like along the lines of, I came from a big family, but can you, along the lines of, we need you to be able to cover your expenses for college, both tuition and living room board. And that was like I was like, okay, I don't remember exactly what I said, but then I remember like doing it. And 2 things I did. So I did well in high school and was able to get a scholarship to my undergrad at Villanova. But so I covered that, but then I actually started working a lot. I was working before that, but I worked even more. I worked for, I did like landscaping and odd jobs. I worked as like a gopher in a factory. I worked at a restaurant, a couple of restaurants in my hometown, and then for a moving company. And all like me, I mean, I think I was working like 60 hours a week in the summers, like, and going from like one thing to the next and loving every moment of it. And here's why. It's like, I remember the moving company, like, this is my comment about mentors, is like, I worked with Anthony, who was there, who was older, and like but I think I really got like teamwork and camaraderie and like don't cut corners. And it was amazing to work with somebody who like took that to like and just humility. I mean, I was a cocky kid kind of coming in, knowing I was going to college. And there was a time where, I was like talking to the person we were moving about going to Villanova and was super excited about it. And they were living out near there. That's why. And he kind of pulled me aside and along the lines of was like, hey, like, don't do that again. And I was oblivious. And it was just along the lines of like, acting like you're separate from the rest of the team because you're the one going to college. And I was like, man, I'll never forget that. And he did it in a very helpful way of like, I was like, yeah, that like, no, like you're here, we're a group, like, and we need to work together. And when you're off, it's like you're not being a part of the team. And I was like, wow. And I think it was also like, I didn't realize it was me being, out of touch, unaware. And it was like, but I learned so much in that job about hard work, about teamwork, there's like something about working a 14-hour day. It's 100 degrees inside the truck, 98 degrees outside of it, whatever. Oh, wow. And like you realize like if I don't carry the heavy thing or, or I don't do my part of this, or if I'm not watching out for, it was amazing. It was like, I'd argue like, it may have been may still be my best job ever. And I really like what I do now. Probably not now. But like, it was just funny that like mentors were like the guys I work with through hard work. Like we joked about this, that like when you work with somebody enough, you could communicate with like sounds and movements. And like, it was just funny that we would do that, like almost as a joke. And like the person you're moving had no idea what you're doing, but you're almost like it's weird, but you like love the whole day. But it was like, oh, we're going to do this seemingly impossible, extremely hard task, but like enjoy every moment of it because it's like approaching it like you would like a tough practice for a team or whatever else. So I don't know. I think that to me, it's like, I would have, if you asked me at the beginning, like, will you find mentors in this job? And I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, no, my mentors are these people on paper, and maybe like a professor would be a mentor to me, whatever else. But it wasn't that. It was everyone else.
But you were always open to learning.
I think so. I think it's almost like that also like hard work too. Like I love, like, it's crazy to think about. Like I'm in a job now where I like work more, and I was doing it then as a kid, but it's like, it seemed fun. And it was like, that was one where like, it was the teams that I work with that made it awesome. You know, and you get meals with them, you spent time, you did like road trips. Cause sometimes you drove, you know, sometimes you drive 15 minutes, sometimes you drive 4 hours, just varied. But, you know, we had some overnights. It's like the collegiality of it is something I didn't expect. But I absolutely still will never forget, and found that to be so amazing.
What the main takeaway for me in this last bit here has been community and curiosity. Like having a community of people that you actually love and love being around, and still being curious to be open to learn from them, creates that flow. Like where you can just continue working and you kind of forget about time, and you're enjoying while you're actually working really hard on something.
And I think in part of this, like, and doing things where like most people would be like, you know, like I was listening to the founders today, they're talking about like 95 want this and only 5%, you know, want to, you know, do things differently or approach things differently. I don't know if that's the right number, but I like the idea of like, I don't think there are any people who'd be like, oh, teaching 20 some classes a year is a good idea. Or, oh yeah, go work for a moving company in the summers. And like, I mean, every break I'd look forward to it. Like I'd be like, all right, I'm going to, you know, I'd be able to call up and get the work because I always needed it. But like, you know, like Thanksgiving break or Christmas break, whatever else, I think it would be the day after I'd be showing up, you know, on the trucks at 7 a.m. and loving it. Like, it's just like, it was a job where I think most people would be like, why would you ever do that? And it was like, I don't know, something that, it was an opportunity that I'll never forget. Well, I did for 5 or 6 years, I guess. So.
Wow. I didn't know
for
that.
Summers and breaks, not consistently.
Okay.
The thing, but like, you know, just able to come back in and grab shifts, and, you know, during my entire time in college. Again, like I think probably every Thanksgiving, Christmas break, summers kind of in between other internships or stuff like that.
So, Patrick, before we wrap this up, just common takeaways for me have been, one, kind of be a skeptic on things, but not a cynic. I think being a skeptic is a good place to be. I would also say, you know, if you just listen to founders, you realize most of these founders weren't even skeptics. They were optimists. I would say that they were even beyond the point of just like looking at things skeptically. It's sort of almost a reality that they want to see this world to exist with, that they really want to just force onto this world and create that. So I would say even be an optimist in situations like that, and always be open to learning. There's no one path to coming to the same outcome, and learning is not linear. You can learn in all kinds of ways and in all kinds of fields, and even if you want to specialize, a better way to specialize is to figure out a bunch of different things, go in on them, and you will find some commonalities that will lead you to specializing even better. What else would you add to this?
That's an awesome take. I love the uplifting note that you offer there of like, I think I agree with you. I never fully thought of it that way, because a lot of those founders are challenging the status quo, but they're doing it with the the optimistic lens of I can make things better, but sharing the point of like, and it's going to take work. It's going to take challenging the status quo. But I really like that uplifting perspective on like it's not, oh, things are wrong, right? And a little bit of this I'm talking about things are wrong, but it's like, no, and we can make them better is a, you know, a really amazing and inspirational layer to add to that. So I appreciate hearing that. That's a good perspective for me to take away here. And then, no, it's great. It's been a great conversation. I really enjoyed the time, you know, hearing your thoughts, and I loved your questions too. So thank you for all that. I think you summarized it all pretty well too. I you know, similar ideas, like, you know, being curious, that desire to learn. And I hope I'm inspiring others to do that. I hope I'm, you know, leading by example too, each day, and don't lose that, you know, don't become complacent or set my own ways in different ways. So
you've really done that for me in a lot of ways. And that's why I wanted to bring you on, because you've opened up my mind to challenge things more regularly, and to be curious about the smallest of things. And you do that really well in class. So thank you so much for teaching us, first of all, this summer. It's been a blast. And I hope to stay in touch, honestly.
Well, thank you for the time today. So I think I really enjoyed this. This was good. And thanks for connecting during the classroom. I would put that was more you. I mean, I responded to it, but I definitely give you the you were talking about mentors and everything else. I definitely want to credit you for kind of reaching out and asking me questions and sharing different things. So it's been a good opportunity for me. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. Take care.